You can't hide from destiny, I whispered to myself as the rain pounded against the pavement, turning the streets of Manhattan into a slick mirror reflecting neon signs and the blur of headlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my beaten-up Honda Civic, knuckles white, heart hammering, as I tried to navigate through the storm that seemed to mirror the chaos inside me. Every few seconds I checked the rearview mirror, convinced I was being followed, though part of me hoped I wasn't. The engine groaned under the strain, tires sliding over wet asphalt, and I cursed under my breath, wishing for a moment of calm that never came. Up ahead, a black SUV waited at the intersection, its glossy surface reflecting the red and green lights in distorted patterns, and before I could react, my car skidded and collided gently, the impact jolting me forward but mercifully leaving me unhurt. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure stepped out, the rain clinging to his perfectly tailored suit, dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes a piercing shade of blue that seemed to see through every lie I'd ever told myself. Derek Callahan, I would later learn, exuded authority in a way that made the city around him fade into insignificance, the storm now a mere backdrop to his presence. "Are you all right?" His voice was calm, almost unnervingly so, cutting through the drum of the rain and the ringing in my ears. I nodded, though my pulse refused to settle, every instinct screaming that nothing about this encounter would be ordinary. Around him, two men in dark suits moved with precision, positioning themselves subtly but unmistakably, a silent reminder of the world he commanded. Derek's gaze never wavered, and in it I saw not just control, but a quiet curiosity, the kind that unsettles rather than comforts. I tried to form words, to explain, but they stuck in my throat, meaningless under the weight of his scrutiny. The SUV doors closed behind him, leaving a tense silence punctuated only by the rain, and I realized that my life, the one I had clung to through years of ordinary struggles, had shifted in a fraction of a second. I had entered a world I didn't understand, ruled by rules I had yet to learn, and yet, beneath the fear, a spark of something else flickered, curiosity, adrenaline, the odd pull of inevitability that made me glance at him again, at the way his eyes softened briefly as he regarded me. I knew then, without understanding how, that this encounter was the beginning of something far larger than a single stormy night, that choices would be forced upon me, alliances tested, trust challenged, and through it all, my path would intertwine with Derek Callahan in ways I could not yet imagine, leaving me teetering on the edge between fear and fascination, uncertain whether I was stepping into salvation or a new kind of danger. Emily's hands were still trembling as she stepped out of her Honda, rain dripping from her soaked hair onto the asphalt, and Derek stood a few feet away, his presence commanding yet oddly still, his piercing blue eyes never leaving hers, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. She tried to gather her scattered thoughts, pressing her palms against the hood of her car to steady herself, and noticed the glint of his watch catching the intermittent streetlight, a subtle reminder of wealth and control that contrasted sharply with the worn tires beneath her feet. "Follow me," he said, voice low but carrying an unshakable authority, and without fully understanding why, she obeyed, climbing into the passenger side of his black SUV, the leather interior smelling faintly of expensive cologne and polished wood. The engine purred as he drove, the rain smearing the city lights into ribbons of color across the windshield, and she could feel her pulse struggling to settle against the rhythm of the car. They moved through narrow side streets where the glow of neon signs flickered across the wet pavement, and she caught glimpses of his meticulous attention to every detail. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled strength, the occasional glance at the rearview mirror, as if he were aware of every shadow that followed them. Emily tried to break the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" And he did not answer immediately, letting the words hang, letting the rhythm of the tires on the slick road fill the space before he finally spoke, "Because someone has to," and the brevity of his statement felt heavier than any explanation could have been. Her thoughts swirled, images of ordinary life flashing alongside the reality of being in a car with a man whose name carried weight in every alley and corner of the city, and yet, the way he navigated traffic, the precision with which he executed turns, even in the rain, made her wonder if there was a side of him that existed beyond the reputation. They pulled up to a modest building tucked between taller structures, the windows glowing warmly against the gray night, and Derek parked without a word, opening the door for her with an unexpected politeness, a stark contrast to the storm of his presence. Emily stepped inside, the smell of coffee and old wood greeting her, and for the first time in hours, she could breathe, though the lingering tension in her shoulders refused to ease. Derek leaned casually against the doorframe, watching her, and she realized that his scrutiny was not just about control, it was about understanding, observation, and perhaps a silent test. He spoke then, words measured. "You have more courage than you know." And she felt a strange warmth despite the lingering fear, a recognition that this encounter was no longer just about danger. It was a crossing of worlds, where ordinary and extraordinary collided. Outside, the rain continued its relentless rhythm, but inside that small space, the storm was replaced by quiet anticipation, questions unasked, boundaries untested, and the awareness that this night would not be easily forgotten, that the choices made in the next moments would ripple far beyond the streets slick with rain, and Emily could not yet tell whether the path she had stepped onto was salvation, challenge, or the beginning of a story that would define both of their lives. Emily stepped further into the warmly lit building, the contrast from the rainy streets outside almost surreal, the scent of coffee and polished wood mingling with the faint smell of rain clinging to her clothes, and she could hear the soft hum of the heater struggling against the chill, the warmth brushing against her chilled skin in a gentle embrace. Derek remained near the entrance, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, watching her with a measured gaze that seemed to take in every movement, every hesitation, and she realized that his observation was not intrusive but calculated, as if he were trying to understand not just her actions but the rhythm of her thoughts. She moved toward a small table by the window, the city lights outside shimmering through the droplets on the glass like scattered diamonds, and for a moment, the world outside faded, leaving only the sound of her own breathing and the faint tapping of rain against the panes. She sank into the chair, hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve, and dared a glance at Derek, noting the way his eyes softened briefly before hardening again with that unmistakable aura of command. "This is not a place you are used to," he said finally, voice low, carrying an undercurrent of both curiosity and caution, and she nodded, words caught in the swirl of adrenaline still coursing through her. "No, it is not," she replied, voice steadying as she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth, that every ordinary rule she had known was suspended in the presence of someone like him, and yet there was a strange comfort in the certainty of his control. Derek moved closer, footsteps deliberate, the click of polished shoes on the hardwood floor echoing softly, and he placed a hand on the back of a chair across from her, leaning slightly as he studied her face, the rain now a distant rhythm behind the walls. "You have questions," he stated rather than asked, and she felt the weight of his words settle like gravity, pressing her thoughts into focus, and for the first time she realized that she had been holding her curiosity at bay, that the questions about his world, about the storm she had stumbled into, about the life that seemed so far removed from her own, were all pressing at the edges of her mind. She took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the room seep into her, and asked softly, "Why me? Why now?" Derek considered her, his gaze holding the clarity of someone who measured outcomes with precision, then allowed a small exhale, as if sharing just enough without revealing the full depth. "Because you are the only one who will see this clearly, who will understand that choices have consequences, that trust is currency, and that courage is rare." Emily felt the words settle, resonating in the quiet space, and a subtle shift occurred, a recognition that despite the uncertainty and the unfamiliarity, she was not simply a passenger in this narrative, that her presence mattered in a way that neither the storm nor the city outside could diminish. The hum of the heater, the soft light, the gentle persistence of the rain against the window, all became a backdrop to the realization that her life had intersected with Derek Callahan in a way that demanded awareness, courage, and a willingness to step into a story far larger than any she had imagined. And as she met his eyes, she sensed the unspoken promise that the night held revelations, decisions, and a path forward that would unfold in ways she could not yet predict, leaving her poised on the edge of anticipation, curiosity, and a new understanding of the world she had entered. The soft glow of the overhead lights filled the room, reflecting off polished surfaces and casting elongated shadows that seemed to move with the faintest shift in the air, and Emily could not shake the sensation that every sound, every movement, was being measured, catalogued, as if the building itself were listening. She followed Derek down a narrow corridor, her footsteps muffled against the carpeted floor, the quiet only punctuated by the distant patter of rain against the windows, and she noticed the way he navigated the turns and corners with a careful precision, almost as if he had memorized every inch of the space before even stepping inside. A subtle tension coiled in her chest, equal parts fear and curiosity, as he paused at a large, ornate door, his hand resting lightly on the brass handle, the cool metal grounding her in the moment, reminding her that despite everything, she was very much in the reality of this encounter. Derek's gaze swept over her as he opened the door, revealing a study filled with shelves of books, papers neatly stacked, and a single lamp casting a warm halo over the desk, and the quiet order of the room stood in sharp contrast to the storm that had brought her here, a sanctuary of calm and control in a world she had not anticipated. She stepped inside, noting the subtle scent of leather and polished wood, the kind of detail that spoke to someone who valued structure and clarity, and as her eyes adjusted, she could see a small collection of framed photographs, a glimpse into moments of a life meticulously curated, yet partially hidden, a puzzle she was beginning to piece together. Derek leaned against the edge of the desk, hands loosely clasped, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them, the outside world dissolving into a haze of curiosity and quiet anticipation. "Look at this," he said softly, gesturing toward a photograph of a younger boy standing beside a tree, the sunlight caught in his hair just so, and Emily felt a pang of recognition, a connection she could not yet name, as if this room, this moment, held more meaning than she understood. She approached cautiously, drawn to the image, and Derek's eyes followed her, unwavering, filled with a complexity that hinted at both vulnerability and control, and she realized that beyond the authority he exuded, there was a side of him shaped by history, responsibility, and perhaps unspoken regrets. Emily inhaled slowly, the weight of the encounter settling on her shoulders, yet beneath it, a spark of trust began to flicker, fragile but undeniable, and she sensed that the choices she made in the next moments would not only affect her own path, but the unfolding of the story Derek was weaving around her. The hum of the city beyond the windows was a distant echo now. The rain softened to a rhythmic whisper, and in the quiet, a space opened for reflection, decisions, and understanding, leaving Emily aware that she was not merely a witness to this life, but an integral part of it. And as she turned to meet Derek's gaze, the promise of revelations, challenges, and unexpected connections hung in the air, a silent invitation to step deeper into a narrative that was only beginning to reveal its shape. Emily lingered near the window, watching the city shimmer beneath the rain-soaked streets, each light reflecting like a fragmented memory of the night, and she could feel the tension from earlier settling into a subtle rhythm, her breathing syncing with the faint hum of the heater and the occasional drip of water from the eaves outside. Derek moved toward a nearby chair, his steps measured, the soft click of his shoes on the hardwood floor punctuating the quiet, and as he seated himself, he did not immediately speak, instead observing her with an intensity that made every second stretch, a silent acknowledgement of the complexity of the moment. Emily's gaze traced the outlines of the room, the polished wood, the carefully arranged books, and the photograph that still lingered in her thoughts, and she realized that she was not just absorbing the environment, but the gravity of being in a space controlled with such deliberate care, where every detail seemed to reflect a facet of the man before her. "You are different from what I expected," Derek said finally, voice even yet tinged with something unreadable, and she felt the weight of his observation press gently, yet insistently, against her consciousness, making her consider not only how she appeared, but what she represented in his world. She hesitated before speaking, choosing her words with care. "I suppose I do not belong here," and he allowed a faint, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging the truth of her statement without refuting it, letting the silence deepen the connection rather than diminish it. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm, the city a blurred backdrop of color and light, and Emily felt herself drawn into a mental dance of calculation, instinct, and curiosity, sensing that the story unfolding around her was more intricate than she could yet decipher. Derek shifted slightly, leaning forward with his forearms resting lightly on his knees, eyes locking with hers, and she caught a glimpse of something fleeting beneath the surface of his control, a trace of vulnerability, or perhaps the subtle awareness of shared stakes, and the thought made her pulse quicken despite the calm of the room. She moved closer to the desk, fingers brushing against the edge, drawing strength from the tangible, familiar sensation, and he watched, the quiet attentiveness making her feel simultaneously exposed and acknowledged, a paradox she could not unravel but was compelled to accept. "The night is not over," he murmured, the words soft yet carrying a weight that hinted at the unfolding of decisions, choices, and revelations still to come, and Emily recognized that her presence in this space was not incidental, that the convergence of her ordinary life with his extraordinary existence was deliberate, inevitable, and charged with potential. As the rain's rhythm faded into the background, she understood that the hours ahead would test perception, patience, and intuition, that every glance, every pause, every word exchanged would shape the narrative in ways neither of them could yet predict, leaving her poised between fear, fascination, and a cautious anticipation, aware that the next moments would demand courage, clarity, and the willingness to step fully into the unknown. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated the room, casting warm reflections across the polished wood and the spines of neatly arranged books, and Emily felt a strange sense of calm settle over her, though her pulse remained alert, attuned to the rhythm of Derek's movements. He walked slowly around the desk, hands behind his back, and Emily noticed the subtle precision in his steps, each one deliberate, measured, and yet carrying a fluid grace that suggested control without force. She shifted slightly, the chair creaking under her, and he stopped, his piercing blue eyes fixing on hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten, a quiet awareness passing between them that spoke of observation, assessment, and silent understanding. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle, the city lights reflecting in tiny pools on the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic served as a gentle reminder of the world beyond this room. Yet the room itself felt like a pocket of time suspended, insulated from everything else. Emily reached for the edge of the desk, fingertips brushing the smooth wood, grounding herself, and in that small motion, Derek's gaze softened, a subtle acknowledgement of her presence, her choices, and the courage she had shown simply by being there. "You are stronger than you realize," he said quietly, the words carrying weight not as a statement, but as a recognition of the trials and instincts that had brought her to this moment, and she felt a quiet warmth bloom within her, a mixture of relief and tentative trust that had not been there when she first collided with his world. She looked around, noticing the framed photographs again, each one telling a fragment of a story, and she sensed the layers of responsibility, expectation, and history that shaped him, and in that understanding, the tension between them shifted from uncertainty and caution to something more reflective, a shared awareness of the stakes and the potential that lay ahead. Derek leaned against the back of the chair across from her, arms crossed lightly, the soft fabric of his suit rustling with the motion, and Emily met his gaze, feeling the careful balance of authority, patience, and observation that defined his presence, realizing that their interaction was a dance of perception and subtle negotiation rather than any overt command. She took a slow breath, letting the warmth of the room and the steadiness of his presence settle over her, and thought of the rain outside, the city alive with possibilities, and the quiet power in the small, contained space where decisions were forming, choices being measured, and paths were beginning to converge. "The night has more to show you," Derek added, his voice low, precise, and Emily felt the weight of anticipation settle fully, a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and the understanding that the story they were part of was only just beginning, and that each step, glance, and word would shape the moments to come, leaving her poised between caution and a compelling intrigue that drew her further into the narrative unfolding before her. Emily followed Derek down a narrow hallway, the soft carpet muffling their footsteps as the faint echo of the city outside seeped through the thick windows, the rain now reduced to a gentle patter that highlighted the contrast between the calm inside and the chaos beyond. The walls were lined with bookshelves, filled with volumes that seemed carefully curated, each title chosen with precision, and she could not help but feel that every object in the space was an extension of the man she was beginning to understand. Derek stopped by a large window, hands resting lightly on the sill, and gestured for her to look outside. The streets glistened under the city lights, puddles reflecting the neon and amber of the skyline. And for a moment, Emily allowed herself to simply breathe, to take in the scene, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. It is easy to feel overwhelmed by what you see, by what you do not see, Derek said, voice steady and calm, eyes still on the city below. Emily turned to him, curiosity mixed with caution. "Why show me this?" she asked softly. He shifted, hands clasped behind his back, and replied, "Because understanding the world I navigate is part of understanding me, and you need to see more than just the surface." She nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words, realizing that she was not merely a guest in this space, but a participant in a narrative that demanded awareness, perception, and subtle judgment. Derek moved away from the window, walking back toward the center of the room, and Emily followed, her gaze taking in the intricate details, the texture of the rug underfoot, the soft flicker of the lamp casting warm light across the desk, the way his movements seemed deliberate yet unhurried. "I am not used to people moving through my world so freely," he said, glancing at her with a hint of bemusement that softened his usual intensity. Emily felt a small flicker of confidence, realizing that her presence mattered, that her curiosity and willingness to observe had not gone unnoticed. She walked toward a chair near the desk, hands lightly resting on its back as she considered the balance between caution and engagement, the space around her suddenly feeling both intimate and significant. Derek settled into the opposite chair, arms resting casually on the armrests, eyes locked with hers, and the silence between them was filled with unspoken questions, the weight of potential paths and decisions that would shape the story unfolding. Emily let her gaze drift briefly to the photographs on the wall, each one a fragment of memory, of responsibility, of choices made long before she had arrived, and then back to Derek, seeing not just the authority, but the layers of a person shaped by experience, by obligation, and perhaps by moments of reflection rarely shared with anyone. The rain continued its soft rhythm outside, the city alive but distant, and Emily felt a connection forming, tenuous yet undeniable, a mutual recognition that the night held more revelations, decisions, and subtle challenges than she could yet predict, leaving her poised on the edge of awareness, anticipation, and a curiosity that beckoned her to engage fully with the world Derek was revealing. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, casting a silver sheen across the streets that reflected the glow of distant streetlights, and Emily stood by the window, watching droplets race each other down the glass, her thoughts tangled between the ordinary life she had known and the extraordinary path she had stepped onto. Derek moved to the center of the room, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, hands clasped loosely behind his back, and the soft lighting highlighted the angles of his face, the way his eyes carried the calm of someone fully in command, someone who observed without judgment yet with unwavering awareness. Emily shifted slightly, her fingers tracing the edge of the windowsill as she drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease just enough to allow her mind to focus, and she noticed the faint hum of the heater, the subtle creak of the floorboards under their movement, the rhythm of the space settling around them like a cocoon. "There are choices to be made," Derek said quietly, voice low but precise, and Emily realized that every word he spoke carried weight, not as an instruction but as an invitation to understand the intricacies of his world, to engage with it thoughtfully rather than reactively. She turned to him, curiosity mingled with apprehension, asking, "What do you mean?" And he tilted his head slightly, a small shadow of a smile touching his lips. "The life you observed tonight, the world you glimpsed outside these walls, is not simple. It is layered, and knowing which layer to act upon can change everything." Emily felt the gravity of his statement settle in her chest, a mix of anticipation and reflection, and she understood that this room, this quiet space amidst the rain and the city beyond, held lessons as much as it held answers, and that observing was as crucial as acting. Derek approached the desk, resting a hand lightly on its polished surface, and she followed his gaze to a series of documents and photographs that lined the edge, each one a fragment of decisions, of histories, of calculated movements, and she realized that her presence was not incidental. She was being invited to witness, to learn, and perhaps to influence subtly. The subtle aroma of polished wood and leather enveloped her, grounding her, and the soft tick of a clock somewhere in the background punctuated the quiet, marking the passage of moments dense with possibility. She could feel the quiet power of anticipation pressing gently against her awareness, a sense that decisions were forming in the air, that what she chose to notice, to question, to trust, would shape the narrative unfolding before her. Derek's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, carrying an unspoken understanding that the night was far from over. And as she held his gaze, Emily sensed that the storm beyond the walls had not only shifted the streets outside, but had shifted the course of her own journey, that each heartbeat, each glance, each measured breath was a step deeper into a story that demanded both courage and clarity, leaving her poised between observation and action, curiosity and comprehension, and fully aware that the path forward was as uncertain as it was compelling. Emily moved toward the desk, her footsteps careful against the soft carpet, feeling the subtle shift in the room as Derek observed her with the same intensity that had marked every moment since she arrived. The glow of the lamp highlighted the contours of his face, calm yet commanding, and she sensed that every glance, every pause in the rhythm of his presence was deliberate, inviting her to notice, to consider, to respond with thoughtfulness rather than haste. She reached for a small stack of papers on the corner of the desk, fingertips brushing the smooth surface, and the tactile reality grounded her in the midst of all the uncertainty, giving her a focal point while her mind processed the complex interplay of control, observation, and subtle invitation that defined Derek's approach. Outside, the drizzle continued to trace lines down the windows, the city lights reflecting in ripples across the glass, and Emily could hear the faint hum of life beyond the walls, the distant sound of tires on wet streets, voices muffled by distance and the sheltering of the building. Yet inside, the room seemed suspended, a quiet space of measured breaths and unspoken understanding. The decisions we make in small moments often define the larger path, Derek said, voice low but precise, carrying the weight of experience and the suggestion of lessons learned through careful observation. Emily looked at him, considering his words, the subtle strength of his posture, the way his eyes seemed to map the room, her own position in it, and perhaps even the trajectory of their conversation, and she realized that every choice she made, every gesture, every slight adjustment of stance or glance, was part of a dialogue beyond spoken words, a silent negotiation of awareness and presence. She inhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the room seep into her, softening the tension in her shoulders, and noted the way the shadows moved with the flickering lamp, casting shapes that seemed to echo the intricate interplay of strategy and patience that had guided Derek's actions. He walked slowly around the desk, hands clasped lightly behind his back, and she could feel the subtle cadence of his movement influencing the rhythm of her own awareness, the quiet energy in the space compelling attentiveness, reflection, and a recognition of the stakes present even in moments of calm. Emily's mind traced the layers of the evening, the storm outside, the collision of cars, the measured introduction to his world, and the ongoing challenge of navigating a space where observation, intuition, and subtle judgment were paramount. And she understood that the night was building toward revelations, decisions, and insights that could not be rushed, that demanded patience and active engagement. She turned her gaze to Derek, noting the interplay of authority and quiet attentiveness in his expression, and felt a sense of partnership forming, not in words, but in mutual recognition of the journey ahead, the shared awareness that each action, each thought, each measured response would ripple through the narrative that was unfolding. The rain continued its soft rhythm outside, distant and persistent, and Emily felt herself settling into the balance of observation and action, curiosity and comprehension, ready to navigate the unfolding complexity of the night, aware that every heartbeat, glance, and breath carried weight, and that the story they were both part of was only beginning to reveal its depth and scope. The room felt smaller now, the soft light of the lamp casting long shadows that stretched across the floor and the walls, and Emily could feel the weight of the night pressing gently against her awareness, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and cautious resolve that kept her on edge. Derek moved toward the window again, hands resting lightly on the sill, eyes scanning the city below as if the streets themselves held stories he needed to decipher, and Emily followed his gaze, noting how the reflections of neon lights shimmered across the wet pavement like scattered fragments of memory, each one a reminder of the choices and moments that had brought her here. She shifted slightly, the carpet beneath her feet muffling the movement, and felt the subtle cadence of the room, the soft hum of the heater, the occasional creak of floorboards, the distant rhythm of traffic outside, melding with the pulse of her own thoughts, creating a quiet intensity that was both grounding and electrifying. Every decision, no matter how small, shapes the path ahead, Derek said, voice low but deliberate, carrying a weight that made Emily consider each of her actions with newfound awareness, each glance and gesture a potential influence on the narrative unfolding between them. She looked down at the desk, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood, feeling the tangible reality beneath her touch, and realized that the room itself was a space for observation, reflection, and understanding, a setting that demanded engagement and attentiveness as much as trust. Derek stepped closer, the soft fabric of his suit rustling with the motion, and for a moment, the room held only the quiet dialogue of presence, an exchange without words, where observation and perception carried as much meaning as speech. Emily inhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the room seep into her, easing the tension in her shoulders, and she felt a spark of confidence emerging, a recognition that she was not merely being guided, but invited to participate, to interpret, and to understand the subtle layers of the world he inhabited. The rain outside had slowed further, pattering softly against the window, creating a rhythmic backdrop that punctuated the quiet intensity of the moment, and she allowed her gaze to sweep across the room again, noticing the carefully placed objects, the photographs that hinted at history, decisions, and memories, and the way Derek's eyes followed her, not with control, but with a measured interest that made her aware of the significance of her presence. She felt the tension between caution and engagement, between fear and curiosity, balancing delicately as she considered the next move, realizing that the night was far from over and that each subtle interaction, each careful observation, would shape the unfolding story. Derek's voice broke the silence once more, steady and calm. You are learning quickly, and that will matter. And Emily felt the weight of that acknowledgement settle over her, a mixture of reassurance and challenge, leaving her poised between reflection and action, curiosity and understanding, fully aware that the path ahead required both attention and courage, and that the choices she made in the coming hours would define the rhythm, depth, and trajectory of the night that had only just begun to reveal its shape and significance. Emily shifted her weight from foot to foot as Derek moved slowly toward the window, the faint glow of city lights reflected in his sharp blue eyes, and she felt the subtle tension of anticipation settle over her, a delicate balance of curiosity and awareness that kept her alert to every nuance of the room. The rain outside had diminished to a soft mist, the streets glistening with reflections of neon signs and traffic signals, creating a blurred mosaic that seemed to mirror the layers of thought running through her mind. She ran her fingers along the edge of the desk, grounding herself, feeling the smooth surface under her touch, and noticed the slight rise and fall of Derek's shoulders as he exhaled slowly, a quiet rhythm that contrasted with the stillness of the space. Observing is as crucial as acting, he said, voice calm and deliberate, carrying the weight of experience without the need for emphasis, and Emily realized that each movement, each glance, each subtle decision was part of a larger pattern she was only beginning to understand. She turned slightly to look at him, the lamplight catching the angle of his jaw, the faint shadow of a smile brushing the corners of his mouth, and she felt the complexity of the man before her, authority tempered with awareness, control softened by subtle acknowledgement of her presence. Derek stepped closer to the desk, resting a hand lightly on the surface, and Emily sensed the quiet energy shift, a call for focus, attention, and the careful consideration of the unfolding dynamics. Outside, the distant hum of the city mixed with the soft rhythm of remaining raindrops on the windows, and she noticed how each sound, each reflection, added to the awareness that the room was both a sanctuary and a space of subtle challenge. "Your presence matters," Derek continued, voice low, measured, and Emily felt the impact of the words not as instruction, but as recognition, an acknowledgement that her engagement, her observations, and her responsiveness were all part of the fabric of the evening, the narrative they were navigating together. She exhaled slowly, the warmth of the room countering the cool mist seeping through the slightly cracked window, and allowed her attention to sweep across the space, the photographs, the neatly stacked papers, the objects that seemed chosen for both form and function, each a subtle extension of the person guiding her through this environment. Derek's gaze followed her movements, steady and perceptive, and she felt the quiet invitation to participate, to notice, to consider, to weigh each detail as part of understanding the broader context, a space where patience, awareness, and judgment carried as much significance as words. Emily's pulse steadied, and she realized that despite the unknowns, the unfolding night held opportunities for insight, for connection, and for comprehension of the layers she had only begun to perceive, leaving her poised at the edge of reflection, engagement, and anticipation, fully aware that each subsequent choice and observation would shape not only her understanding, but the trajectory of the story developing around them. Emily remained near the desk, hands lightly resting on its polished surface, feeling the subtle hum of anticipation in the room as Derek moved closer, the soft light catching the edges of his suit and the calm intensity in his gaze. She could sense the careful deliberation in every step he took, the quiet authority that did not demand submission but commanded attention, and she realized that each movement, each glance, carried a significance she could feel in the rhythm of the space around them. The city outside was muted now, the rain having slowed to a gentle mist that reflected the soft glow of streetlights, and the room felt insulated, a cocoon of warmth and quiet observation that demanded awareness. Derek leaned lightly against the back of a chair, fingers brushing the smooth wood, eyes fixed on her with a steady patience that invited reflection rather than reaction, and Emily felt a subtle shift within herself, a willingness to engage, to notice, and to consider each nuance of their shared environment. "There are moments when understanding comes not from asking but from observing," he said, voice calm, deliberate, and Emily nodded slowly, realizing that the rhythm of the night, the layering of observation, and awareness was a lesson in itself, and that she was both participant and witness to a world she was only beginning to comprehend. She shifted slightly, fingertips tracing the edge of the desk again, grounding herself, feeling the tangible reality beneath her touch, and noted the way the soft lighting highlighted the objects in the room, each one deliberate, purposeful, a reflection of the person guiding her through this space. Derek walked slowly toward the window, the faint reflection of neon and amber light dancing across his face, and Emily felt the tension and anticipation of the evening crystallize, understanding that each choice, each glance, each unspoken acknowledgement carried weight and potential influence on the trajectory of the narrative unfolding. The subtle rhythm of the heater, the quiet patter of residual rain on the windows, and the distant hum of the city combined into a backdrop that sharpened her awareness, and she realized that the room was a microcosm of observation, reflection, and measured interaction, where patience and perception were paramount. Derek's voice broke the quiet again, steady and insightful. "Engagement is as much about timing as it is about presence," and Emily felt the significance of his words resonate, understanding that the choices she made, the attention she paid, and the awareness she maintained would shape the next moments, the connections, and the unfolding story. She exhaled slowly, letting the warmth and stillness of the room infuse her with a cautious confidence, her mind alive with possibilities, and she sensed that the night had more to reveal, lessons to teach, and insights to offer, each requiring her focus, thoughtfulness, and courage to navigate, leaving her poised between curiosity, comprehension, and anticipation of the events that would inevitably unfold as she continued to move deeper into the space Derek had subtly constructed around her presence. The first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, soft and pale, casting long, quiet shadows across the polished surfaces of the room, and Emily stood near the window, watching the city awaken slowly beneath the lingering drizzle, each reflection in the puddles glimmering like fragments of the night that had passed. Derek moved across the room with measured steps, his presence calm, yet undeniably commanding, and she noted the subtle ways in which the light caught his hair and eyes, the precision of his movements, and the quiet authority that seemed woven into every gesture. The air between them was filled with an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of the events, observations, and insights that had unfolded over the course of the night, and Emily felt a deepened awareness of the weight and significance of each choice, each glance, each word exchanged. She ran her fingers along the edge of the desk, grounding herself in the tangible, the solid, the real, while her mind reflected on the layered experiences, the subtle rhythms of observation, engagement, and reflection that had guided her steps and thoughts. Derek leaned lightly against the back of a chair, arms crossed loosely, and spoke in a measured tone. The path we walk is shaped by awareness as much as action, and Emily absorbed the weight of his statement, recognizing the delicate balance of perception, patience, and decision-making that had defined the night. Outside, the soft rhythm of the rain continued, blending with the distant hum of the city, creating a gentle backdrop that accentuated the quiet intensity of the room, the space between them, and the subtle dance of observation and understanding that had emerged. She turned her gaze toward him, noticing the faint lines of thought etched in his expression, the careful consideration behind his steady eyes, and she felt a sense of connection, fragile yet undeniable, a recognition that their interaction had shifted from initial tension and caution to a nuanced awareness of mutual influence and shared insight. The light of the city began to brighten incrementally, brushing across the polished wood and casting fleeting glimmers on the books and photographs, and Emily realized that the night, though still rich with potential, had reached a point of clarity, a pause in the unfolding narrative that allowed reflection, comprehension, and a subtle anticipation of what would follow. Derek's voice, calm and deliberate, punctuated the silence. Understanding is the first step to influence, and Emily felt the resonance of the words, the importance of her attentiveness, the value of her engagement, and the knowledge that the choices she would make from this point forward would carry weight in shaping the trajectory of the story. She inhaled deeply, letting the warmth and stillness of the room settle over her, absorbing the quiet gravity of the moment, aware that the night had guided her through a series of observations, reflections, and realizations that prepared her for what was to come, leaving her poised at the edge of anticipation, insight, and readiness to engage fully with the world Derek had revealed. The city outside now bathed in the gentle promise of a new day,